Good day, everybody. This is Bill Boley. I'm here from Air Force Lifecycle Management Center, Cost and Economics Division, to provide you some on-the-job training uh, for full funding and incremental funding and how those are used in cost estimate phasing. For people in the trainee program, these are CE26 and 27. Those are cost OJTs that need to be accomplished in order for you to fulfill your trainee program requirements. This training is supplemental to other material, and you will need to, discuss with your supervisor uh, what you've done and what you've learned in order to accomplish or check off the accomplishment of the OJT on your roadmap or on your training plan. So this course is going to cover full funding policy, full funding estimating, including an exercise, incremental funding policy, and then there'll be an incremental funding exercise. We'll have a summary, and then for questions, I'll direct you back to your local functional chain of command, whether that's cost or budget in your local location. So full funding policy, this applies to the procurement and the MILCON appropriations. Funding for full funding is provided each fiscal year to procure usable end items. The item cannot depend on a future year's funding to complete. What this means is that you need all the funding to buy all the pieces and parts that are required to assemble or create something that's usable for the Air Force. This, even if the system or the components or the thing you're buying takes many years to build or assemble, you need to still have all the money up front. This is in order to provide some insight into what the full complete cost of a single usable thing is to Congress and to the American people, since we're using taxpayer funded money to buy these things. We want to be responsible and buy complete things and make sure it's transparent that what the cost of that complete thing is upfront before we start buying it. The best way to do this is for us to budget for all the money we need in 1 year upfront before that purchase is started. There's also a requirement that we only order as many items as can be delivered within a 12-month period. So there's a limit to the number of items we can buy as well, based on what we can accept or what can be delivered to us. So if the using command says they can only accept, 8 things a year, then we are limited to ordering 8 things a year. Uh, so just to give some more examples of full funding policy. So say you want to purchase an F-22, we need to budget for the entire cost of an F-22 in a single year, the year that we plan to start the contract. It may take 3 or more years to actually build and deliver that F-22 to the Air Force, but when we agree to buy that F-22, when we sign that contract and obligate the money, we need to have all the money available. That doesn't mean we necessarily obligate all the money that's required upfront, but we commit it all to the contract at that time. We have it all available to do that. And like I said, the acceptance process as well for those deliveries. So now that we kind of understand, you can buy one full F-22, then there's a limit on how many we can buy. And again, it's going to depend on, well, how many the contractor can produce, but also how many we can accept as the government, because the process for accepting an F-22 or any system is going to differ, uh, but it's going to have a formal process so that we can, make sure it is what we are purchasing. It has all the capabilities. It functions in a way that is acceptable to us so that we can accept it. Um, Not unsimilar to when you receive a package at home, you check to make sure it's the right thing and it does what it's supposed to do. And then if it doesn't, you don't accept it or you return it immediately. So that we do the same thing with our stuff, so that we can make sure that we're getting what we're paying for. There's also an important nuance to full funding, that it's the definition of usable end item. And this is one of those things where a usable end item is specific to the situation of the purchase. For example, if we're buying a new GPS receiver for an E8 joint stars, and that same GPS receiver is being used on another platform, that doesn't mean it's a usable end item just because another platform can use it. The purchase is for a joint stars, and therefore that GPS receiver needs to be usable on a joint stars, as that's the intended purpose of that purchase. In this case, joint stars is not capable of receiving that GPS receiver without modification. Therefore, the cost of modifying the joint stars in order to receive that GPS receiver is also part of the usable end item, because without that cost, without the dollars available to modify a joint stars, the joint stars cannot use that receiver. Therefore, the usable end item is both the equipment and the modification to the platform. So again, it's important to understand, the purpose and intent of the purchase, what it's doing, what it needs to be for, and how it becomes usable, because that whole package of usability is what needs to be fully funded up front, so that we don't need any additional money to actually use the equipment for its intended purpose. The other thing I wanted to cover here is these exceptions to full funding policies. So just with every policy in the government, there's always rules about when it can and can't be applied, or should and shouldn't be applied. So in this case, there's ways to get an exemption from this full funding policy. You have a system that has an exceedingly long lead time. So if there's a component of your system that takes more than 3 years to make, you could petition to get advanced procurement for long lead items permission, which will give you permission to not abide by full funding. In this case, you would be buying this longer lead portion of your system in advance, and then the remaining portions of your system later. So if there was, a special engine that was being used on an aircraft that took, 4 years to make, then you could buy that engine, or you could ask for permission to buy that engine in advance, and then buy the rest of the aircraft later, so that you didn't have all that money just sitting there for 3 or 4 years before any of it got spent waiting for that engine. This is again just to ensure that we're not tying up money for too long with waiting for components to become available. The other option for the exception is advanced economic order quantity procurement. Typically, this is referred to as a multi-year procurement. Uh, so, if there's substantial savings uh, or in stable requirements, stable funding, there's a lot of requirements that go into when this is viable for use or can be granted. So if you have a realistic cost estimate and there's a national security involved, or a national security risk involved, you can justify a multi-year procurement. So this falls into the similar category as I outlined with advanced procurement, where you're going to buy stuff over multiple years because that's what's available, or that's how the lead time is feeding into the system. But it also falls into order quantities. So if you need to buy more than what you can receive in a year because the contractor is going to be delivering them slowly. So say you're buying F-22s and the contractor produces them at a certain rate, and we can't receive 100 F-22s all at the same time, but the contractor can't actually deliver 100 F-22s all at the same time. We could order them all together, pay for them up front, and then have them delivered over a period of time. So that would be a way to have not abide by full funding because of the 12-month delivery period. Similarly, if there is, we're gonna purchase 1,000, aircraft, or we're gonna purchase 1,000 missiles, and there's a component within the missile that is substantially less expensive if you buy it in a bulk quantity. So say that there's, a component that if you buy all 1,000 of them up front, you can save, 10%, 20% of the cost of those components. You can potentially get permission to buy that all 1,000 of those subcomponents up front, even though you're going to only be ordering maybe 100 missiles per year for the next 10 years. So again, there's ways to get around full funding when it is appropriate, but the justification needs to be provided up front, and eventually Congress would need to approve that you're going to meet this exception for full funding. So for full funding estimating, here's an example where we've got an aircraft that we're purchasing. So this is obviously very, very, very simplistic uh, version of an estimate. We've got engines for the aircraft, we've got the fuselage, and we've got onboard systems for the aircraft. Those systems are purchased over 3 separate years, given the lead time for them, and then they're all assembled in order to deliver one completed aircraft. So even though we're buying, or the contractor is buying portions of the system in different years, we need to fully fund that cost estimate in the first year. So you'll see here in the plain total cost estimate line, we've got a 5 and a 15 and an 8. The total is $28 million. So over those 3 years, we're buying parts of this aircraft and assembling them. But when we budget for this, we are going to create a budget estimate that has all $28 million up front in the first fiscal year, so that we have all the money available to purchase that one aircraft when the purchase starts. And you'll see the buy quantity in FY19. This is the year in which we start the purchase. And then there's a delivery quantity in FY21, and this is where the year in which we receive the usable end item. So again, we want to time phase our cost estimates appropriately, or realistically as we can, but we still need to account for full funding and pull the cost back to that first year, so that we're capturing that full funded cost. So now we're going to jump over to Excel to do a little full funding exercise. You see here in the Excel file that you can get from SharePoint site for LCMC, FCC, where the OJT information is housed. You can see we've got in the green here some given program data. This given program data includes a work breakdown structure, which is how we break up our cost estimate into smaller pieces in order to ensure that we have completed and accurate cost estimates. With that work breakdown structure, we've got a number of components per radar. So for example, the array has a transmit and receive line replaceable unit for this theoretical radar. and there's 108 of those components that are required to build one radar. And then down here we have a need. So the user need is that there's 3 radars that's required for this program or for this estimate. Next, we have some component unit pricing over time. So over the 4 years of this contract, the contractor could have provided us price changes that they anticipate over those 4 years. These could have been estimated in other ways as well. So they're just given in this case. This is more of a perfect case type of thing where you won't necessarily experience this realistically as you support a program, but for the purposes of this training, we're going to be given these pricing tables over the 4-year period. So we've got a price for the TRLRU over the 4 years and the other components as well over the 4 years. Next, we've got component availability. So the contractor has also provided us some availability saying, they can only produce so many of these components per year or purchase so many a year for whatever reason that may be. So we've got a limitation of how many of these components are available in any given year. So for the TRLRU, we've got 81 components are available per year. So maybe the contractor can only produce 81 of them a year, and so on and so forth. So given these inputs that we receive, we want to follow the steps here that I've outlined in this exercise. So step 1 is to build a schedule for the 3 units that we're going to purchase. So we've got a number of components that's required, a number of components that's available. So we're going to walk through here to figure out, how many components are available for unit number 1 in year 1 by looking at this component availability and then figuring out, okay, well, if that's how many are available, did we meet the number that's required? If not, then we need to go into the next year and use some of those ones. The remaining ones from that next year can then be used for the second unit. The second unit is going to have some additional components that's required. We're going to have to go into the next year to get some more of those components, and so on and so forth for unit 3. So the idea here is it's going to take more than 1 year's worth of components to purchase a single unit. So you'll see right off the bat, you've got 108 required for a unit, and you only have 81 available for the first unit, or for the first year. So you're going to have 81 here, but you're going to have some additional units required to meet the full requirement. So we know that you need 108, and you've already purchased 81 in the prior year. So 27 additional units, components in the next year will give you your total of 108 components for this subsystem. And you're going to continue to go on with this through the WBS and then also into the next one where you've got, for this particular component, again, we know that there's only 81 available, but 27 of them have been used for the first unit. So that means there's 54 still available in the year 2 to support the second unit, which means we're going to need some from the third year, again, because we've got 108 unit requirement and we've purchased 54 in the prior year. So again, 54, which gives us our 108. And since we, again, had 81 and we've already purchased 54, we've got 27, which means we need all 81 in this last year to fulfill the need for the third unit. So you're going to continue to do this for all these other components as well, the other WBS elements. From there, once you have that all laid in, we can then go to step 2. So step 2 is going to put a cost to those things. So now we've got the number of components in the given year that it is, and now we're going to calculate what the cost of that is, or the expected price for that thing is. We're going to do that by just looking at the quantities here and multiplying it by the appropriate price. So in this case, we've got the TRLRU in FY20. So we're going to select that price and that quantity to get the total cost for those components. And you're going to have to continue to do that for all the remaining WBS elements. Once you've completed that and you've got all the costs filled in here, you'll be able to move to step 3, where you answer these questions about when each component, when each unit can be purchased or will be purchased, and then when how much that unit is going to cost in the table here. So I'd ask you now to go ahead and pause the video and complete this exercise to the best of your ability in order to understand how to do this in Excel, and then I will be right back in order to walk you through the answers to this exercise. Okay, so hopefully you've walked through this exercise on your own after pausing the video, and you've completed everything that you needed to. So let me walk through completing this as well, in case you haven't. So for step 1, we've got component schedule for unit 1, and we've got a 4 requirement for servers. We've got 4 available in the first year, so we can buy 4 of them here. Again, we've got 4 in the next year, so we can put 4 in the second year for the second unit, and 4 in the third year for the third unit. For the GPS hardware, we need 2 of them. We only have 1 available in the first year for the first unit. We've got 3 available in the second year, so we can put 1 for the unit 1 and then 2 for the unit 2. And then we only have 1 available per year in the last 2 years, so we'll have a 1 here and a 1 here. Next, we're at the laptops, so we need 3 laptops. We have 3 laptops available each year consecutively, so we know we can do 3 in this year, 3 in this year, and 3 in this year. And lastly, the power distribution system. We actually don't have any power distribution systems available in year 1, and then 1 available for the year 2, 3, and 4. So we're going to have to allocate the first available to the first unit, and then the second, and then the third. Okay, so now we can look through our schedule, make sure we've accounted for everything. We've got the right number of components for all of our subsystems or our WBS elements. Everything's captured. So now we can go on and get the cost for those things. So if you're using cell references for this, you can easily drag and drop once you've set up each unit. So I've selected this first cell here where I've already set this formula, and if I just drag this formula 1 cell over, you'll see it drags both the target cells over 1. So I'm still grabbing the appropriate years. I've got the right quantity and the right cost here. Similarly, if I drag this down for these elements here, it'll drag the target cells down and grab the quantity here and the price here, which is the correct quantity and price, so I can verify that. So I can just highlight this whole table in order for Excel to calculate this for me. And then I just want to add up the cost for these things. Simple sum formula. And there you go. Now I've got the total cost here for the system, and the yearly cost here for the first unit. For the second one, again, we don't want to drag the formulas from the first one to the second one, because then it will be dragging into this area. So instead, we want to start over with our formulas. So again, we want to just make sure we're selecting the right years. So this, even though I have no input here, I can select here. So FY20 quantity times the FY20 rate. The answer is going to be 0 because I have a 0 quantity, but then I can drag this over and you'll see it populate with correct values. And again, you can verify is selecting the correct input variables here for this formula. And then add your sum equation in order to get your totals. And lastly, the third unit, and your sum equations. And when you drag the sum equations, just like the other cell references, the cell references just drag with this equation. And there you go. We've completed step number 2. We now have cost elements or cost estimates for those 3 components or 3 units that we're planning on purchasing. And you'll see here the costs align in the years in which the quantities are in order to make sure we're grabbing the right prices, because these could be pre-negotiated prices and we want to make sure we're providing the most accurate total cost for these units that we can. So we can move on to step number 3 to answer these questions. So question number 1 is to fill in the table for the buy quantity. So for this, we want to look at when we're buying the first components of each of the units. So we know we're buying 3 units. So unit 1 has a schedule, unit 2 has a schedule, and unit 3 has a schedule. The cost is incurred over multiple years, but again, we're fully funding these units when we purchase them. So the buy quantity is the quantity we're purchasing in the year the purchase starts. So for unit number 1, the first year we have anything scheduled to be purchased is FY20. So in FY20, we are going to buy unit number 1. Unit number 2 doesn't have anything scheduled in FY20. The first year has a purchase scheduled is FY21. So in FY21, we're buying unit 2. And then for unit number 3, again, nothing in 20 or 21. We're going to start buying this one in FY22. And that brings us to our total of 3 units. Question number 2 is about the budget estimate. So we've created a cost estimate here in step 2 by aligning the cost to the price of the components based on availability, based on information we have received or was given. So now we want to take this information and fold it into a budget estimate. So this is where, again, we want to remember we need to budget for these entire items in the year in which they're bought. So if you look at our buy quantity, you see that the first unit is in FY20. So in FY20, we want to budget for that entire end item. So unit number 1 and total cost is $7.619 million. So we want to put that in this cell here. Unit number 2 is purchased in FY21. So again, we want to capture the total cost of Unit 2 in that year. So we reference this total cost for Unit 2. And lastly, Unit 3, we grab the total cost for Unit 3. So hopefully you did the exercise on your own and you came out to the same answers as I just walked through. And if not, hopefully you understand a little bit more about how to do it and how to get the right answer moving forward. So we're going to jump back to the slides and move into incremental funding. For incremental funding, the policy applies to the Research Development Test and Evaluation Appropriation, or the RDT&E appropriation. This is the appropriation that's typically used in the system design and development phase of a program. So in this phase, the funding is being used to do research, to develop some technology or develop some system, or test and evaluate a system that's been developed. So in this case, the funding is provided for work that's planned in a given fiscal year. So the idea to this policy is that we are given the amount of money we need to operate or to execute 1 year of a program in order to kind of segment our money over time so that we aren't tying up too much money up front for a program in a specific program, so that money can be allocated more freely or moved around if needed. It's also true that with these types of programs, given what they're doing, there's incremental value to the program as well. So the program could be doing research. If the program does a year's worth of research, that research has some value to the government. We can use that research to inform future research or to make decisions about the requirements or other things. Similarly, if there's development work going on or testing going on, all those yearly activities can inform decisions, inform programs, inform how we go about formulating or changing or updating our requirements for our national security. So that's why we can incrementally fund this, because there's value incrementally. But when we do a cost estimate, when we do a cost estimate, we want to just segregate our cost estimate by fiscal year, government fiscal years, which runs from October through September of the next year, in order to account for that fiscal year cost or fiscal year chunk incrementally. Of course, there's exceptions to incremental funding as well, because incremental funding is actually designed for very, very much flexibility in funding availability. The exception to it is if you happen to have some non-severable work, so something that can't really be broken into monthly or yearly chunks, but that work is also not scheduled to be longer than 18 months. So if you had a program or a project that was requesting a prototype be built for some system, and that prototype program was going to take 16, 17 months, you could fully fund or get all the money for that in one fiscal year instead of having to break it over into 2 fiscal years, because really the thing you want is the prototype, and if you don't fund the whole 16-month effort, then you don't get the prototype, and that kind of defeats the purpose of the work. And again, this is one of those things where, it may be funded in a single fiscal year. The funding for 3600 or for RDT&E appropriations is very flexible in order to ensure that we can revector money or change what we're doing with the money quickly without having too much complications because uh, technology changes very fast and our threats change very fast. So as we look at emerging threats and we look at emerging technology, the combination of those two things may make us make decisions about where to spend our money and how to spend our money with developing new technology or developing new capabilities. That decision needs to be done quickly, and flexible funding availability is a good part of that. So for the incremental funding estimating, so if we have a theoretical contract here where we've got some software and some hardware and some testing and evaluation, so this would be software development and hardware development. Um, we've got those costs spread over several years for various reasons. Phasing of these elements could be based on historical data, could be based on contractor input, could be based on just durations. So there's a lot of different ways to phase these costs. There's no best phasing method to say that one cost always needs to be phased one way or another. So again, it's all very program specific phasing for these elements that feed into your total cost estimate. So again, consult with your local cost and budget chain of command to get more specifics about traditionally how these elements are phased for the programs you'll be supporting. But regardless of the way it's phased, the budget estimate will look at the fiscal years of the cost estimate and align with it. So in this example, you see software is phased over 2 years, hardware is phased over 2 years, and then the cost of those elements is added up for that fiscal year. So hardware and software is $8 million. Hardware, software, and test in FY20 is $18 million, and then there's $6 million of test in FY21. So again, by fiscal year, government fiscal year, and the budget estimate is the exact same by fiscal year. So again, these different types of efforts, can be considered severable. So software obviously is manpower driven activity. You can sever the amount of time that people work on these things. Um, Hardware, again, is going to be component driven or unit driven, developing subsystems or components. So you can sever those by parts. Testing can be severed by test events. So there's easy ways to look at those types of activities and kind of cut them off within a fiscal year in order to say, these things are happening in this fiscal year and these things are happening in the next fiscal year so that you can sever them with funding. So again, front loading the estimate, but putting all this money up front, like in the full funding requirement, would put that money at risk because uh, 3600 money it traditionally should be obligated as soon as possible within its first fiscal year. And obviously, if this work's not happening for 3 years, that money would be tied up for a prolonged period, putting it at risk of being taken to be used for other priorities. So, again, there's a lot of um, advanced acquisition type of things that can be said about this that you will learn as you gain experience. So let's jump over to the exercise for this one um, in order to walk through that as well. So here we have, again, some given program information. We've got a radar program, again, that we're doing the development costs for. So we've got a work breakdown structure, again, for this system. And each work breakdown element has got a duration in months and a total cost, and then some phasing description. Again, this phasing descriptions can be, a wide variety of things. Depending on what information you have, what data is available, your decisions on how to phase these things may change from this. So for this, again, I want you to go ahead and pause the video to get through these 2 steps of completing this exercise so that you can try to do it on your own. Following these instructions to lay the cost in this table here, which goes out for the entire duration that's required, and then using this table to complete this table down here. So go ahead and pause the video and try to complete that now. Okay, hopefully you have tried to complete this and have successfully done so, but in case you needed some help, let's walk through it. So for the first element here, we've got software development, which is a 36-month effort with a total cost of $26 million. And the phasing description here is that we've got equal monthly sprints. So sprint is a software development term used to describe efforts. So we've got equally monthly sprints from January of 19 through December of 21. So we know it's 36 months, and we know it starts in January, and we know all of them are equal. So if we put in our $26 million divided by 36 months, we'll get our monthly cost estimate. And then we want to drag this out, the same exact equation, right? It's going to be equal for the total of 36 months, which should go out to December 21. Let's see. December 21. Okay, we've got all those filled in, and you can verify right down here at the bottom that we've got a count of 36, which means we've got 36 cells selected, which is exactly what we should, because it's 36 months, and each cell represents a month. So that's got a total. We can also see that the total is 26, so we know we have the right number. So we can move on to the next one, system engineering. This is a 40-month duration with a total cost of $8 million. The phasing for this one says 60% of the cost even spread for the first 12 months, the remaining 40% even spread for the remaining 28 months. So for this, it starts with contract award on 2 January, so we know it starts in this first month, and it goes for 40 months, but for the first part here, it's only 12 months. So we want to look at the total cost of $8 million and 60% of that cost. So if we multiply by 0.6, that will give us 60% of that cost over the first 12 months. So we want to divide it by 12 to get that monthly amount. So that gives us our 60% divided by 12, and then we want to spread that 60% over those first 12 months. Since we started in January, we go to December, and that'll give us our 12 months. So now we have our 60% over our 12 months, and then the rest is going to be the remaining 40% evenly spread over the remaining 28 months. So if we go back here, and we want to go our 8 million times our 40% divided by the remaining 28 months gives us the cost for those months, and we can then spread that down to the remaining 28 months. And again, you can see I selected the right number. I've got 28, and if I select the entire total, the entire line, can see it sums to the $8 million total, which is what we are looking for. So we know we've done that correctly. The next one is program management. This is a 42-month duration, which is the entire period of performance. And we've got a $12 million cost, evenly spread, fairly straightforward. 12 million divided by 42 months across the whole effort. Okay, the next one is a technology demonstration for 17-month effort and a cost of $35 million, and it starts in October of 2019. So it doesn't start at the beginning, it starts later in over here in October. And there's no other details about this work. So what we can see here is we've got the description, and is that it's some kind of demonstration, a technology demonstration, and it's going to take 17 months. So there's different ways to look at this, but for the purposes of this exercise, I want to assume that the entire value of this needs to be funded upfront. This is a non-severable type of activity where we're looking for some kind of demonstration. At the end of this 17 months, it's less than 18 months, so we can fund this entire activity upfront by budgeting for it all up front. So we want to go ahead and plan on having all that money available in October of 2019. So this is again where we don't know exactly what the spending spread of this money would be over that 17 months. So we want to use the information we have to set up the budget in a way, or set up the estimate in a way that best positions the program for success. So, without having additional information, it's hard to justify doing anything but funding this entire effort up front. So we can put $35 million in October of 2019 because given that this is a technology demonstration, they could need a lot of this money upfront to purchase material or to purchase information or data that they need to do this demonstration. So evenly spreading this money over that 17 months may actually hinder the progress of this effort. So again, we want to make sure we look into these things and be as thorough as possible when we do our cost estimates. But for this exercise, we're just going to assume it's funded upfront. The next element is going to be test. So for this one, we've got 12 test events. So we don't have a period of time. We've got a number of test events, and we've got $24 million total cost. And then phasing information says that each test costs the same amount. So we've got even test costs. We've got 3 tests in FY21 and 9 tests in FY22. So again, if we've got 12 tests and the cost of $24 million, we've got $2 million per test, 3 in FY21 and 9 in FY22. Since we don't know when in FY21 or FY22 these events are going to occur, we should assume that they're going to occur at the very beginning of the fiscal year and to ensure we have funding available. This becomes more relevant when we have continuing resolution or other situation where funding availability at the beginning of the fiscal year is at risk of being handed down to us for various reasons. So when we lay this into our monthly estimate, it's important to put it in a conservative manner, saying that we don't have any additional information, so we want to assume it happens in October. As additional information becomes available, like a testing schedule gets published that lays out when these tests are going to occur, we will then be able to move this amount into a different month. That's especially important on the budget side of the fiscal year planning in order to plan our obligations and expenditures for that money. So there we go. There's our $24 million with our 9 tests at $2 million a test in 22 and our 3 tests at $2 million a test in 21. Okay, so there we go. We've completed this portion, and we can verify this. If you look at the total cost here, right, we've got $105 million for the total of all these elements. And if you look at the total across the top here, we've got 105. That's exactly correct. It's important to verify your work as you go to make sure you didn't miss something or overlook something. So now we want to complete step 2, which is providing the fiscal year totals for these elements. So for software development, system engineering, program management, the technology demonstration, and the test. So since we have the monthlies and we have fiscal years up here, we can just use sum calculations to grab the cost for each of these elements for this period of time. So you want to make sure you only grab the months that fall under the fiscal year. So fiscal year 19, and then we can get fiscal year 20. Fiscal year 21. And lastly, fiscal year 22. And even though we don't have numbers in that last part of fiscal year 22, we want to grab all of those cells so that we can drag these equations down. Because again, as you drag the equations down, the references drag with them so that you can ensure that it's grabbing the right cells as you drag those. And then we can add our sum equations here in order to get our totals. And we've got our $105 million, which is exactly what we should have. It's now spread across the 4 fiscal years. So now we know how to budget our program. Hopefully everybody got that the same phasing over these 4 years. And certainly if you don't, you can reach out to your supervisor, your chain of command to get help with whatever you messed up or where you're having trouble in this, and discuss with them. Okay, we're going to jump back over to the slides. Okay, so now in summary, right, full funding is procurement. So when we do full funding procurement, it allows us to track and report by usable end item. And again, this is important where we understand what we mean when we say usable end item. Just because somebody can use it doesn't mean it can be used for the purpose in which we're buying it. So again, it increases the transparency and the accountability of those taxpayer funding. We don't want to have it be confusing or difficult to figure out what it actually costs for us to purchase an F-22. We want it to be very straightforward. We don't want Congress or the American people to feel like we're trying to hide this information from them. So this is why this policy was put in place. Incremental funding provides us that flexibility that we need to execute without overcommitting funds or over obligating funds to certain efforts that take long times. This gives us that flexibility that's inherently part of that type of appropriation with the research and development type of funding. Proper phasing of an estimate is an important part of having a realistic estimate and can be a key component to program success. If the program doesn't have the money when it needs the money, the program's going to have problems. Whether that's money too early or too late, it can cause problems for the program, whether that's additional oversight or having to slow contractors down or stop work or other problems. Again, we want to make sure that we're providing realistic cost estimates and then producing realistic budget estimates to make sure that these programs are set up for success. So now, having walked through this class and gone through the exercise, you should be able to, demonstrate an understanding and knowledge of full funding and how to apply it in a cost estimate, and also demonstrate an understanding and knowledge of incremental funding and how to apply it to cost estimate. Please consult with your supervisor with regards to that. If you have any questions, you can contact your local AFLCMC, FZC office, your cost and economics office, or your functional chain of command if you want to talk to your supervisor or whoever in your functional chain of command, the person who reviews your work, in order to have any questions answered. Uh, okay, thank you for listening and have a good day.